Importing 3D models works similarly to importing other asset classes, but there are a few differences. Specifically, all textures assigned to the model should be in the same directory as the model file itself. This is the only exception where texture files are to be stored outside of the textures folder. As before, in the previous video, the project directory will be opened from the project menu. Since a 3D model is being imported, navigate into the Meshes folder. For this tutorial, I am going to import one of the house models from the demonstration project. In order to keep the Meshes folder organized, I will create a subfolder and call it Houses. Once inside, it will simply be a matter of dragging and dropping the model within the folder. This 3D model and its textures have been imported and is available for its use in the editor. It is important to know whether the file format of your asset is supported. Details of this can be found within the documentation, and a link to the correct page has been included in the description below. To place the 3D model within a zone must first be loaded. For this tutorial, I will use the example area zone, which was created in an earlier video. Once the zone has been loaded, move towards the Architect panel, which is selected by default, and click on the Place Model Object button. A new collection of settings will have appeared, and that will help with the placement process. First, the house model needs to be selected. Click on the Browse button. This will open a dialog within the Meshes folder of your project, and we can see the folder called Houses that I created earlier. Navigate inside and select the 3D model file. The dialog will close and the path of the selected file will appear in the Architect panel. If the Align to Ground option is checked, the model will automatically be rotated so it lines up with the ground below where it is placed. The Y position modifier allows for the model to be placed at a higher Y position from the target placement location. The filter option will be discussed in a future video. In order to place the model within the zone, simply press the right mouse button in the viewport area where you want the model to be. The model has now been placed within the zone, and it can be edited at any time. You can continue to place the model in other locations by simply pressing the right mouse button again. Once you are happy with your placements, press the small arrow button within the Architect panel to come out of placement mode. If the model you have imported is being rendered with a checkerboard pattern instead of its textures, then something went wrong during the loading process. This issue can be caused by various reasons, such as the model being exported without a material or the textures assigned to the material not being found. Regardless of the cause, Bright Engine has compensated by creating a new material for you. The textures can be manually reassigned from within the Architect panel. Simply press the left mouse button over the model to select it and scroll down in the Architect panel until you have found the material settings. These settings will be described in detail within a future video. However, for the purposes of this tutorial, you can assign textures to the material by pressing on the corresponding texture slot button. This will open up a dialog within the same folder of the selected model. Simply select the texture you want applied to your material. For this example, I will use a normal map texture just to show how it's done. I will now switch it back to the correct texture. For an explanation as to how to prepare your textures, there is a detailed instructions within the documentation. A link to the correct page will be included in the description below. A model can have as many materials as required, but it is worth keeping in mind that each additional material yields an additional draw call, which can impact performance. In this next example, I will demonstrate how to import a 3D model with LODs, or levels of detail. LODs are a mechanism available to you to help optimize your zones for better performance. Unlike other programs, Bright Engine extracts all model LODs from a single file. The advantage of this method is a faster loading time and a less cluttered data folder. In order to establish which meshes within a model are LODs and their associated level, some trickery is needed to be performed within a 3D modeling program. For this tutorial, I will be using an open source program called Blender. However, you are free to use whichever program you are most familiar with. To specify which meshes within the model file is an LOD, the name of the mesh needs to be adjusted to include a suffix. The suffix is _ LOD 0 and then the LOD number, as demonstrated here. Bright Engine supports up to 5 levels of detail, not including the base model. However, this does not mean you must create 5 LODs for each model. In some cases, you may only need 3, or 2, or sometimes even 0. It is important that all meshes have the same origin point and that they perfectly align with each other. With all the meshes selected, I will now export this model using the OBJ format to the Project Meshes folder within its databanks. Back in the editor, just as we did with the house model, I now place the exported model within the zone. I then select the new model and scroll to its level of detail settings within the Architect panel. If the model with its LODs were correctly exported, the number of levels will be displayed next to the LODs found setting. The maximum distance setting dictates at what distance from the camera the model will no longer be rendered. The fade range setting allows you to add a fade in or fade out effect over a certain distance once the maximum distance has been reached. The transition range setting allows you to add a fade in or fade out effect between the LODs of the model. Both these settings help reduce the effects of popping, and a noise filter is applied over the fade range to create a more natural dissolving effect. The last collection of settings are the LOD distances. These are the distances at which the LODs will begin rendering at. I will quickly input some distance values for each of the level of details to demonstrate the LOD system in action. This concludes the first part of the Importing 3D Models tutorial.